Pin-drop silence filled the room instantly. Right then, all I felt was the burning sensation in my face. After a while, I narrowed my eyes and looked at the woman in front of me. Her face was distorted with rage, as if she had a lot of pent-up anger. Rebecca tugged at me and yelled, "Scarlett, you lied to me." Did I lie to her? Was it about the baby? Seeing that she raised her hand again, I immediately grabbed it and scorned in an icy tone, "Ms. Larson, don't you have any self-respect? How can you be so impudent when you are a mistress? You're really shameless." The sound of rushing footfalls came from the corridor before she could respond. Abruptly, Rebecca shook my hand off. The sudden loss of balance caused her to fall and hit her head hard on the desk. By the time Ashton and Joe hurried in, they saw Rebecca lying on the ground in a disheveled state with blood on her forehead. Meanwhile, I remained intact and stood condescendingly in front of Rebecca. Damn it. What a waste of talent that she didn't become an actress. Rebecca, are you all right? Joe immediately helped her up and scolded me, "Scarlett, you've gone too far." Did one. I could not be bothered with him and turned toward Ashton, whose face was expressionless at that moment. I didn't push her. Do you believe me? He then looked at the bloodstains on Rebecca's forehead and warned me with a cold-eyed stare, "Scarlett, know your boundaries." Those few words stamped out my trust in him. As I stared at him in disbelief, I let out a chuckle. I am so naive. He had fooled me into believing he was the right one with his change in attitude for the past few days. How ridiculous. Suppressing my sorrow, I walked toward Rebecca and sneered in disdain. "Ms. Larson, you need to improve your acting skills. Have you seen anyone, not to mention a pregnant woman, capable of pushing someone so far away?" Right after finishing my sentence, I planted a slap on her cheek without giving her the chance to respond. The slap was so hard that my hand hurt as well. As Rebecca covered her face in shock, I gave her a faint smile. This is payback. Do practice the code of ethics for mistresses. Don't make a joke out of yourself. With the turn of events, the atmosphere in the office had become unbearably awkward, and I desperately wanted to flee the scene. After shooting them one last glare, I stomped out of the office. Ashton grabbed my wrist when I passed him. Immediately, I retracted my hand from his grasp and said sarcastically, "Mr. Fuller, you'd better cheer your sweetheart up." Upon leaving the office, I headed straight to Glenwood Apartments but soon recalled that Macy was resting at that hour, so I made a detour to the supermarket to buy some groceries. As she was away from home for the past few days, some of the groceries had expired and needed to be replaced. Besides, I had some spare time on my hands. Unexpectedly, I bumped into Nick, who was being pestered by a young beauty on the street. It seemed like he had offended that girl and got himself into trouble. Initially, I had no intention to interfere since Elle was in a grim mood. However, Nick noticed my presence and came over, tugging at me helplessly. "Help me." Without waiting for my response, he quickly told that beauty, "Sarah, this is the lady whom I talked about. I have admired her for almost 10 years. I'm really not interested in you. Could you please stop pestering me?" Sarah looked pitiful after being rejected. "Nick, just because you fancy her doesn't mean she feels the same way about you. Besides, she should have been married at this age. What do you like about her? What? Do Elle look that old?" I did not want to be involved in their fight. But Nick was holding onto my hand tightly. With a stern expression, he explained to Sarah, "During our junior year, you once asked me about the picture of a girl in my wallet. Look at her carefully. She's the one. It's true that I've admired her since 10 years ago. The girl scrutinized me with her big brown eyes for some time before bursting into tears. I was starting to get a headache seeing them bickering over such a trivial matter. Nick, what are you doing? He gave me a helpless look. I'll just want her to give up. It's really annoying that she won't stop pestering me all these years. Give up. This is a waste of time. I rolled my eyes at him, then turned around and walked away. Sarah's crying could still be heard behind me. However, Nick ignored her and ran up to me. Scarlett, I really like you. Besides, I'm rich and powerful. Ashton doesn't have feelings for you, so why don't you leave him and consider me? I was in no mood for his gibberish, so I stopped abruptly and glared at him coldly. Stunned, he paused in his tracks but soon regained his composure and asked again, beaming, could you please consider me? I warned him, I am not interested in you. Stay away from me. Nick was unlucky for bumping into me that day as I was still feeling indignant about the misunderstanding that happened earlier. I suppressed my anger and headed straight toward the apartment. Unbeknownst to me, Nick was trailing behind me the entire time. All of a sudden, he grabbed my hand and asked with rage written all over his face, are you still treating me like a kid? Damn it. Can't get rid of him. Yes. You're really annoying. Right then, he wrapped his arms around my thighs and threw me over his shoulder before I could finish my words. Oh really? This kid will show you what he's capable of. He growled as he became increasingly flustered. After that, he raised his hand and slapped my buttocks twice. I was rendered speechless. Due to my pregnancy and the pressure exerted on my belly by his broad shoulder, I started feeling dizzy. As he hurried away, I could not bear it anymore and shouted at him, Nick, put me down. This is dangerous because I'm pregnant. Hearing that, he came to an abrupt halt and let me down. He then stared at me with intense curiosity. Since when? Still feeling dizzy, I looked at him helplessly. I'm 2 months pregnant, so keep your antics to yourself and stay away from me. Damn it. As Ashton the baby's father, I tried to hold my anger in and looked at him solemnly. Of course, I'm his wife. Who else could it be? Please leave me alone. However, the man lost his temper and blocked me in. He then asked while gazing at me intently, does he know? Exasperated by his question, I replied, duh, he's the father of the baby. He became deflated upon hearing that, but I was really upset and exhausted, so Elle ended the conversation and entered the apartment. As expected, Macy was sleeping soundly in the bedroom. I supposed she did not get to sleep well in the lockup. It had been quite a while since my last visit here, and her place was in a mess. After cleaning it up, I prepared some fruits and swiped my phone in the living room while waiting for Macy to wake up. Unexpectedly, I fell asleep as well. When I woke up, I realized that Macy had left a note on the coffee table, saying that she went out to buy some stuff. It was almost midnight at that time. Thus, I decided to go home since my apartment was just next to hers. When I got home, it was already 11 at night. At that moment, my phone vibrated a couple of times. Its screen displayed a string of unfamiliar numbers, and I did not want to answer the call. However, that person kept calling and left me no choice but to answer. Hello. Scarlett. It sounded like Joe. Why is he calling me at this hour? Anything. Ashton didn't go home, right? He seemed to be gloating as he continued. You thought that you would be treated differently after you got pregnant, didn't you? Honestly, I really pity you. Your husband is sleeping with another woman now while you are left alone at home. Are you upset? I pinched my glabella and replied impatiently, Mr. Quinn, are you mad because Ashton and Rebecca are having sex and they left you behind? That's why you're calling me at this hour to treat me as your punching bag, isn't it? After a pause, I continued. Don't call me to vent your anger. If you really like Rebecca, you can discuss with Ashton. There might be a possibility that the three of you could. Scarlett, screw you. Elle ended the call before he could finish his sentence. It was an awful day with both work and relationship problems coming my way. My apartment measured approximately 100 square meters. It was not spacious but big enough for me to live comfortably. Feeling irritable after having a bad day, I intended to sleep my worries away. But after taking that short nap earlier on, I couldn't fall asleep anymore, so I turned on my computer to study some data. Upon logging into my email account, I was stunned by that conspicuous email in my inbox. I had almost forgotten about it. Harrison Credit was supposed to handle all of Fuller Corporation's audits. However, I had not expected Harrison Credit to set me up. It gave me no choice but to ask John for a copy of AC Credit's internal report over the years. That report was intended to counter the trouble caused by AC Credit. However, that report became futile as Quinn Corporation's audit would be handled by AC Credit instead of Harrison Credit. Hence, I decided to ignore the email. In fact, I wouldn't even have sought help from John if there was an alternative plan. I felt that I should let bygones be bygones. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Assuming that Macy had returned from grocery shopping, I tried getting to my feet but ended up feeling dizzy, possibly due to long hours of sitting. Right after opening the door, I bent down to get her a pair of indoor slippers. You went out for quite some time. What did you buy? I was still feeling lightheaded. I placed a pair of furry slippers at the entrance. As there was no response, I shifted my gaze to the door. That was when I saw a stern-looking man with an unfathomable gaze at the door, his slender figure looming over me. I could not help but frown. Why is Ashton here? He should be lying on Rebecca's bed now. I wanted to close the door, but Ashton stopped me in time. As his face darkened, he demanded, "Who are you waiting for?" He pushed against the door so hard that I couldn't close it. With that, I gave up and replied languidly, "Who else could I be waiting for in the middle of the night? Of course, someone who can ease my loneliness." He blocked me in after entering. A sharp glint flashed across his eyes as he sneered, "Ease your loneliness." Then he straightened his hip and thrust it at me. "Do you think your loneliness can be eased by this?" At a loss for words, my face flushed a bright red. "Why are you so quiet?" While pressing his body against mine, he landed a soft kiss on my forehead. Then, things started getting steamy. "Why didn't you go home?" He bit my lip and continued in a hoarse voice, "Why are you hiding here?" "Ashton, let go of me." I had never seen such a brazen guy. He was just doting on Rebecca earlier on, but now he had the audacity to come here and mess around with me. He held me close and whispered, "Do you think I'm able to do that now?" I was dumbfounded. Usually, I would have played along. However, after the previous incident, I could hardly respond whenever he touched me. He frowned after noticing that I gave no reaction when he was fingering me. Following that, he carried me to the shoe cabinet and placed me on top of it. I immediately stopped him when he tried to take my clothes off. "Don't even bother. I don't seem to feel anything toward you anymore." I did not know what precipitated it. Sometimes things might seem fine on the surface, but deep down, they were already riddled with holes. Furrowing his brows, Ashton stared at me coldly. No feelings toward me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words could escape from it. Abruptly, he grabbed my hand and dragged me to the bathroom. I was then held in place under the showerhead with the icy cold water raining over me. Ashton, why are you doing this? You should get Rebecca to satisfy your lust. Don't torture a pregnant woman. I almost broke down. Since he has always been doting on Rebecca, why can't he just look for her and leave me alone? The explosion of anger suddenly subsided. Ashton stopped unzipping and became silent for quite a while. He then turned the tap off and stepped away from me. Elle averted my eyes from him. With little strength left, I slumped onto the floor after losing his support. Perhaps due to consecutive days of sultry weather, a thunderstorm broke all of a sudden, followed by a heavy downpour. The bathroom was filled with an eerie silence. Initially, I thought Ashton was angry at me, but apparently, he was not. After regaining his composure, he tidied himself up before turning to me. Get some rest. After that, he left without saying another word. What a temperamental man. I was sitting in a daze when Macy entered the bathroom. When she saw my disheveled state, she yelled at me, "Scarlett, what have you done to yourself? You must think of the baby no matter what happens." Following that, Macy took me out of the bathroom and towel dried my hair while I sat on my bed, staring into space. After a while, I asked her, will a man fall in love with a woman because of their baby? Macy paused for a moment and thought about it. It's possible. After all, many women tend to fall in love with someone due to that reason. Indeed, there are many such cases. I looked at her in a daze and asked, what if the baby is gone? Shocked by my words, Macy patted me on my shoulder. What's on your mind? You are 2 months pregnant now, and the baby has grown substantially. You should deliver the baby. Don't overthink the situation. I covered my face in frustration. Recently, I had been feeling flustered and irritable. After Macy dried my hair, she brought me to the bed and tucked me in. Ashton didn't turn up again for the rest of the night. Worried that I would be unable to sleep because of the thunderstorm, Macy stayed for the night. It turned out that she was right, except that I was too irked to sleep instead of scared. Eventually, I stayed up until the middle of the night. I had barely slept before I was awakened by the buzzing of my phone and realized that it was already morning. It was a call from Stacy, and she seemed quite anxious. Ms. Stovall, Harrison Credit has liaised with the finance department. What about Quinn Corporation? I was aware that I might not make the right decisions in my current state. Thus, I instructed her, contact AC Credit now and hand over Quinn Corporation's audit to them. You're taking charge of this matter. Stacy murmured in acknowledgement before continuing. Sure, Ms. Stovall. High-Tech will operate end of this month. You may have to go on a business trip for a few days. I nodded as I knew that the business trip was inevitable. After Elle ended the call, I got up from bed though I was uncomfortable and tired. Macy had prepared soup for me. She looked at me awkwardly and said, I am so sorry. I seemed to have lost my touch as I had not cooked for many years. After stealing a glance at the burnt soup on the table, I chuckled. You won't be so cruel to a pregnant woman, will you? Her lips curled up into a wry smile. Try it anyway. Judging by the appearance of the burnt soup, I could guess its taste without even trying it. But seeing how eager Macy was, I had no choice but to put my life on the line and try some. How's the taste? Is it nice? She waited expectantly for my answer. I could not come up with a sincere compliment even after racking my brain. Yet, I did not want to discourage her, so I laughed and replied curtly, you need more practice. I couldn't bear to see her dejected, so I hastily grabbed my bag and left for work. However, Macy followed me to the door, refusing to give up. Come back earlier. Elle will cook something delicious. What? No. Spare my life, please. It was still early by the time Elle arrived at the office. Unfortunately, Joe was in the elevator when I entered it. I could not agree more with the saying. The more you hate someone, the more likely you will run into him. Joe greeted me with an enigmatic smile. Good morning, Ms. Stovall. Did Ashton stay with you during the thunderstorm last night? I remained silent while he continued talking in a sarcastic tone. Rebecca is afraid of thunder, so Ashton will stay with her whenever there is a thunderstorm. I'm sure Ashton didn't leave her alone last night. As Elle looked at the pearls on my shoes, I had a strong urge to laugh. It all makes sense now. Last night, Ashton only snapped out of his frenzy because he was worried that Rebecca wouldn't be able to sleep if she were alone during the thunderstorm. There was no way he would have left his lover alone. Joe was right this time, and I had no reason to retort him. In a tripartite relationship, the two who love each other are the actual couple, whereas the other person is the third wheel, which is me in this case. Joe suddenly nudged me. Hey, why are you in a daze? Did you hear what I just said? I looked at him calmly and responded, yes, I did. They are a perfect match. Having said that, I got out of the elevator as the doors opened just in time. Joe shouted from the elevator, Scarlett, what's wrong with you? As soon as I entered the office, Stacy passed me a stack of documents and explained, Ms. Stovall, you need to sign all these papers before the audit. Harrison Credit has already started and should complete J-City's audit within these 2 days, whereas AC Credit will start auditing Quinn Corporation today. I nodded and signed those documents. Pay more attention to Fuller Corporation's audit and inform me of any problems. Keep an eye on High-Tech as well. We can start when everything is ready. She nodded while waiting for me to finish signing those documents. However, I started to feel uncomfortable after looking through some documents. I had been unwell for the past few days, and to make matters worse, I did not get enough sleep last night. Since there were only a few documents left, I told Stacy, you go ahead. I'll pass it to you once I'm done. She replied with a smile, it's fine. I can wait. I have to pass these documents to Harrison Credit and AC Credit shortly and prepare for the audit. It gave me no choice but to finish it as soon as possible. While I was signing the documents, I felt a throbbing pain in my temples. Thus, I quickly finished up and handed the documents over to Stacy. Here you go. Noticing my condition, she asked out of concern, Ms. Stovall, are you all right? Don't worry. I'm fine. After all, there was nothing much that could be done, even if I told Stacy about my headache. I had been suffering from it for quite a while. With that, she left with the documents. When I was about to call Jared, I received a call from him. Before I managed to talk, he asked me, are you going on a business trip once Fuller Corporation's audit is settled? Elle answered, yep. While rubbing my glabella, I asked irritably, I have been suffering from dizziness recently. Occasionally, I even get headaches. Are these normal symptoms during pregnancy? Jared paused for a moment before replying, you must have exerted yourself for the first 2 months. I will prescribe some medicine for you. Remember to take them and rest. Well, I mumbled in reply and sprawled on the table unhappily. If I knew being pregnant is this exhausting, I wouldn't have gotten pregnant in the first place. He chuckled. What nonsense are you talking about? I will join you on your business trip in a few days. I can take care of you. Stunned, I asked shyly, you're coming along just for me? Or, that's not it. I have something on, too. Okay. I'll contact you then, I replied, feeling reassured. Jared was a great friend, attentive and thorough. After hanging up, I remained sprawling on the table, utterly drained out. I was 2 months pregnant by now. I thought I would get a divorce and leave J City after handing off my work. Alas, life was unexpected. What should I do now? If Ashton liked our baby, I could stay. I've already endured Rebecca's existence for 2 years. With my child, things couldn't get any worse, right? Compared to my child not having a father, my worries paled in comparison. For the next few days, it kept raining buckets. Some areas in J City would be flooded during the rainy season. The company was kind enough to let us get off work earlier than usual. I knew Ashton would be spending his time with Rebecca as she was afraid of thunder. I didn't return to the villa and remained at Glenwood Apartments with Macy. Macy had stopped going to her bar because of the drug incident. She started throwing herself into cooking at home. I was glad to spend more time with her. After I thought it through, I stopped clinging to the hope that Ashton would drop by and visit me. However, I would stare blankly into space sometimes. Sometimes, my limbs would go numb if I sat for too long. Jared gave me plenty of medicine and reminded me to take them on time, but I'd forget about them. Macy had to remind me every time. After a week of torrential rain, it finally cleared up. The sun started showing itself in J City. The audit process of Fuller Corporation had begun, and I was busy with high-tech. Macy, on the other hand, told me she wanted to travel alone for a few days. I knew she was frustrated over being wrongly accused of possessing drugs. If Clinton had not helped get her out of jail, she would be serving her sentence by now. She was frustrated because she couldn't do anything. Even if we knew Rebecca was behind this, Ashton was protecting her. Hence, I could understand why Macy wanted to go on a vacation. Since Macy was not around, there was no point for me to stay at Glenwood Apartments. So, I returned to the villa. With Mrs. Erickson there, I wouldn't be alone. After work, I drove back to the villa. Coincidentally, I bumped into Rebecca at the entrance of the villa. She was dressed in a long and flowy blue dress, looking like a Greek goddess beside Ashton's black Jeep. How gorgeous! I couldn't help but praise out loud. At the same time, my heart broke into a million pieces, releasing the anger and hatred within. I should slow down by then, but instead, I floored the accelerator, heading straight for Rebecca. My evil side was showing itself. As long as Rebecca was dead, I would not have to endure her and worry whether Ashton would return or leave. When I sped toward her, I seriously wanted her to die. Suddenly, Ashton appeared and stood between the vehicle and Rebecca. His expression was dark. Elle immediately slammed on the brakes in a daze. For a moment there, I really wanted Rebecca dead. Ashton strode to my vehicle and pulled me down menacingly. "Scarlett, what are you doing?" I crumbled weakly to the ground. He grabbed and steadied me as anger flashed across his gaze. Tearfully, I gazed at him. "Ashton, ask her to leave, please." Tugging his hand, I pleaded, "Ashton, I love you more than you can imagine. Seeing her here is driving me insane. Please ask her to leave, or else, I don't know what I will do to her." Yes, I couldn't hold back my emotions anymore. I had ripped my heart open, showing him my cruelty, selfishness, and everything else within. As our gazes met, Ashton pursed his lips as his gaze softened. He reached out and brought me closer to him. Pressing his nose against mine, he rasped, "What a fool." Picking me up, he glanced at Mrs. Erickson, who had rushed out after hearing the commotion. "Get a cab for Ms. Larson." Mrs. Erickson nodded profusely. Rebecca had just recovered from the shock. She stared at us, her expression pale. Ash, she implored. Go back home. Ashton told her before heading into the villa with me. Behind us, I could hear Mrs. Erickson saying, Ms. Larson, here's your cab. Back in the bedroom, Ashton placed me on the bed gently. He gazed at me and gave me a light peck. Don't act recklessly anymore. Otherwise. He didn't finish his sentence. When his cool lips landed on my shoulder, leaving his mark there with a bite, I frowned slightly but said nothing. After pulling up the covers for me, his phone started ringing on the bedside table. I glanced at it and realized it was Rebecca. Ashton took a glance at it, but he didn't answer her call. After a few missed calls from Rebecca, she texted him. The message read, Ash, please don't leave me alone. After losing my brother, you are the only one I have. I wanted to smile, but there was a lump in my throat stopping me from doing so. Ashton saw the text, too. He didn't reply to it. Instead, he lit up a cigarette and went to the balcony to smoke quietly. Perhaps I was tired after the earlier incident as I fell asleep soon. The thunder was booming loudly when I finally woke up. I thought the sky had cleared, but it was still pouring at midnight. Previously, I wasn't afraid as I was with Macy. But that night, the bedroom was empty. The lightning flashed across the night, and it was terrifying in the dark. Bedroom. I switched on the light and looked around. Ashton was nowhere to be seen. There were a lot of cigarette stubs on the balcony. As he wasn't in the bedroom, I walked out barefoot, hoping to see him in his study. Alas, I was too naive. In the living room downstairs, Rebecca stood there stubbornly, utterly drenched. Her gaze was fixated on Ashton. Go back home, said Ashton in exasperation. No. Rebecca's lips curved up in an innocent smile. You know I'm afraid of thunder. She seemed frail and delicate, especially since she was drenched, with her hair in a messy state. After a long silence, Ashton gave in. Go take a shower. Rebecca nodded. But Elle don't have clean clothes to change into, she said. Your clothes, which you brought here earlier, are still in the guest room. I stood at the top of the stairs silently and overheard their conversation. Rebecca sauntered into the guest room. Back then, George bought this villa because he thought it was spacious. It could accommodate if Ashton and I had more kids. Later on, I realized that day might never come. I didn't even know when Rebecca moved her clothes to the guest room. How ridiculous. Ah! A shriek sounded from the guest room. It seemed like Rebecca had slipped. Ashton's brows knitted up as he strode toward the guest room. Suddenly, he stopped midway and looked up, meeting my gaze. You're awake. I nodded, feeling a pang in my heart. She is hurt. You should go check up on her. Scarlett. I parted my lips and insisted. Go. I couldn't get him to love me, but Elle couldn't stop him from loving someone else, could I? At once, I returned to the bedroom. The rain was splattering noisily on the balcony. I strode out and stood there, allowing the rain to soak my body entirely. Slowly, my heart grew numb. Falling to my knees, I hugged myself tightly. Burying my head between my knees, my tears streamed down uncontrollably. Fairy tales didn't exist in the real world. No one had the ability to help me, nor was it anyone's duty. I had to grit my teeth and get over it myself. I wasn't sure if it was because I stood in the rain for too long, but my head felt heavy. The pain in my heart had gone numb. My whole body was shivering from the cold. Footsteps sounded from the bedroom. Looking up, I saw Ashton coming to a stop beside me. He was obviously livid. Is it fun to torture me? Stunned, I replied, are you happy? He scooped me up unhappily. Scarlett, There are responsibilities which I cannot push away from. Don't torture me using you and our child, all right? I lowered my head as tears spilled out. I wasn't trying to torture you. The heartache was too much for me to bear. I was dripping wet as he brought me into the bathroom. Turning on the shower, he undressed me without a word. I sat in the bathtub, staring into space. My head was spinning as a dull ache throbbed uncomfortably in my heart. We had seen each other naked many times, so I wasn't embarrassed at all and allowed him to clean me. Soon, steam filled the bathroom. My freezing body started to warm up. He wrapped me up in a towel and brought me out. After helping me to put on clean pajamas, he began drying my hair. None of us spoke to each other. I closed my eyes and leaned back comfortably as exhaustion washed over me. Don't fall asleep. Let me dry your hair first, Ashton spoke. He was no longer furious. I remained silent with my eyes shut. The sound of the hairdryer whirring rang in my ears abruptly. It felt so warm and unrealistic to me. Scarlett, Ashton called out my name after switching off the hairdryer. My eyes snapped open in confusion. He pulled me in for a warm hug before saying, "Let's go down together." It was a command that left no room for discussion. Picking me up, he left the bedroom. Downstairs, Rebecca had already showered, her hair half dried. She was sitting in the living room with Joe next to her. "Since when did Joe arrive?" Spotting me in Ashton's arms, Rebecca's gaze flashed with jealousy. She jolted up and tugged at Ashton without hesitation. "Ash, are you going to abandon me?" Her eyes were red and puffy, but she was wailing again. I looked down and shut my eyes tiredly. Why did Ashton bring me downstairs? To see them being intimate. "Rebecca, stop it. Joe will give you a ride home," said Ashton in displeasure. Joe had the same idea. He offered, "Rebecca, I will drive you home." Rebecca was on the verge of breaking down as she exclaimed, "You people think I'm unreasonable, don't you? Now that my brother is dead, all of you despise and abandon me." "Ha!" I sneered. My sneer triggered Rebecca. She turned to glare at me. "Scarlett, what is so funny about it? Oh, you should be gloating now. You've got everything you want." I was amused. What did I get? Pausing, I let out a bitter chuckle. Yes, I got everything I wanted. Thanks to you, Ms. Larson. I am stuck in a loveless marriage. I don't even dare to tell anyone I'm pregnant. You can use your deceased brother to destroy another family. I can't believe how shameless you are, being someone else's mistress proudly. Scarlett, stop spouting nonsense. Rebecca's face flushed red angrily. I couldn't be bothered to argue with her. Nonsense. Look, aren't you acting shamelessly now? This house belongs to Ashton and me. It isn't somewhere for you to show off. Please leave, Ms. Larson. Rebecca's hands wrung together furiously. She gazed at Ashton. When her gaze landed on me, it was full of hatred. I was too exhausted to continue the conversation. When I turned to leave, I heard Rebecca imploring, "Ash, enough." Ashton declared, "Joe, bring her home." I strode upstairs without hesitation. After all, I wasn't in the mood to hear the rest of their conversation. As I lay on the bed, my head and my eyes were throbbing painfully. I immediately made a call to Macy. The phone rang for a while before she picked up. "Miss Stovall, look at the time." It seemed like my call had woken her abruptly. I glanced at the clock, which showed it was 2 a.m. Feeling guilty, I stammered, Macy, I think I'm ill." She was taken aback by my words. "What's wrong? You're ill. Go to the hospital. Is Ashton with you now?" she demanded loudly. I fell silent as I didn't know how to explain my illness. It wasn't something the naked eye could see. Sighing, I replied, "It's nothing. I miss you." Macy didn't press on because she was sleepy. "Babe, you can't sleep." I parted my lips, but my voice died in my throat. You should sleep. We can talk tomorrow." In the end, Elle ended up saying nothing. After hanging up, I curled up in bed. Everything felt dull to me.